Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We're still shocked. Everyone else seems to have moved on to the next thing, but we still can't get over what we saw yesterday when Joe Biden stunned the world and announced during a press conference with no warning at all that he has a potentially fatal disease. I have cancer, Joe Biden said. I got it from living in Delaware. It turns out that Joe Biden's home state is so thoroughly polluted, so supernaturally filthy, that even lepers living in public sewers in Calcutta refuse to go there. It's too unclean. How dirty is Delaware? It is so dirty, Joe Biden said, that when it rains oil. That's why everyone in Delaware gets cancer. They get it from the oil rain. Now Joe Biden has it too. Looking back, voters probably should have known a little more about Joe Biden's Delaware-related risk factors before he became president. It's too late now, and it just got worse. Not only is Biden sick from Delaware's oil rain, now he's got COVID. The White House announced it today. So it's been a tough week overall. Wednesday it was cancer. Thursday it was the coronavirus. Tomorrow you've got to think it's going to be monkeypox. If you or someone you know has recently had unsafe sex with Joe Biden, please seek precautionary medical attention. God knows what you might have picked up. At the White House, they are genuinely upset by today's news, not because they're worried about Joe Biden's health. Everybody who works at the White House already knows he's so thoroughly unwell he can barely speak. These are the people who run his teleprompter. They're the ones who put the little pieces of tape on the floor so he knows where the door is. These are not people who have any illusions at all about Joe Biden's condition. What they're upset about is the fact that Joe Biden just stepped on their message. And from day one, that message has been consistent and unrelenting. Get the vax or else. Get the vax, you can't have a job, or an organ transplant, or Thanksgiving with your kids. Get the vax, you can't visit your mom as she dies in the hospital. Get the vax, prole. It's the most important thing that you can do, and you're a monster if you don't. So people obeyed. They did it. Okay, they said, we'll take the vax. Doesn't look like we have a choice. But are you sure it works? It's pretty hard to make a successful vaccine against a coronavirus. In fact, nobody's ever done it. We tried with SARS almost 20 years ago, and that failed completely. So are you absolutely positive this stuff works? Are you sure it's safe and effective? Of course we're positive, screamed the mannequin. We're the U.S. government. We know these things. We don't make mistakes. Stop asking questions. Questions have no place in science. Just take this shot and you will not get COVID. That's guaranteed. Joe Biden said that. He didn't just say it once. He said it many, many, many times.
The fact is, this has been a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Unvaccinated. The Delta virus, which is much more transmissible and more deadly in terms of unvaccinated people, the various shots that people are getting now cover that. You're okay. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. If you're unvaccinated, you have some reason to be alarmed. Many of you will, you'll experience severe illness in many cases if you get COVID-19, if you're not vaccinated. Some will die. We have in hand all the vaccines we need to get every American fully vaccinated, including the booster shot. So there's no excuse for anyone being unvaccinated. This continues to be a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Yeah, there's no excuse. And if you don't get the vax, you're going to die from COVID. You're going to get COVID if you don't get the vax. Now, if he'd said that once or maybe like 11 times, you could say, oh, he's got dementia, whatever. He said it pretty much every day. And he's not the only one. They all did, beginning with Lord Fauci.
Need for yet again another boost, in this case, a fourth dose boost for an individual receiving the mRNA. And then the issue of vaccines actually, at least with regard to SARS-CoV-2, can do better than nature. When people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected.
So it turns out once you get vaccinated, you can feel safe. You're not going to get infected. You're not like the dirty people who didn't get the vax, the anti-science people who are all going to die. And when they do, we're going to laugh at them because they deserve it. And by the way, it wasn't just Biden who's just reading the script. It wasn't just Fauci, who will say whatever it takes and is, of course, covering up his own role in creating the virus in the first place. Even actual doctors, even the head of the CDC, even Rochelle Walensky herself said the same thing.
Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real-world data.
Yeah, it's not just in the clinical trials, it's in real-world data. Just look around. Observed reality. You don't know anyone who's gotten the vax and then got oh, wait, everybody who got the vax got COVID. How does that work? Well, they never explained. They stopped telling you it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated because that was so obviously untrue. You got the vax and you still got COVID. So they stopped saying anything at all, and they hoped you would forget about what they said for a full year and all the thousands of people whose lives they destroyed on the basis of that lie. But what they didn't do, ever, was apologize for it. They hoped they wouldn't have to. But then last Friday, Joe Biden, again the President of the United States, became visibly symptomatic with something during a speech in Jerusalem. Watch.
I was making a speech, and I had a terrible headache. Excuse me, a terrible headache. And sorry, I swallowed wrong. I had a terrible headache. This is years ago, and I did a very stupid thing.
Remember when you were a kid, all that public health authorities were trying to stamp out cigarette smoking, and they printed these huge posters of a wino dying of cirrhosis, tugging on a Pall-Mall. They said smoking is very glamorous. In other words, don't be this guy. Well, if we ever have another pandemic, let's hope we don't, but if we ever do, play that tape. That's what you don't do. Remember the CDC and its guidance? When you develop symptoms, you isolate immediately. You don't cough on people at press conferences. Those are the rules that your kids lived by at school. That's why they wore the little masks. They couldn't breathe. Your children were also told to scan QR codes for contact tracing purposes if they ever developed COVID, a dry cough. But today, Joe Biden gets COVID, and when reporters asked how he got it and why he didn't isolate after getting symptoms, the response from the White House press secretary was, and we're quoting here, I don't think that matters. It just doesn't matter. Turns out it doesn't matter. Go ahead and super spread if you want to. So if you're on Air Force One yesterday, or you went to the big press conference in Massachusetts, or if you were the recipient of a fist bump in Saudi Arabia, you may have the Rona. But nobody cares. I don't think that matters, says Karine Jean-Pierre, the president's glass ceiling shattering publicist. So obviously they're hypocrites. Did you know that? Had you heard that before? Well, now you can mark that down as confirmed. That's only part of the story. And we don't want to ignore the fact that the real story is the President of the United States is 79 years old and has a, how to put it, complicated medical history, and now he's got COVID. So what does that mean? Well, sincerely, we hope he's going to be okay. We do know he's going to lose his sense of smell, maybe forever. What does that mean? No more sniffing little girls. If you're Joe Biden and your main source of pleasure at this late stage in your life is sniffing the hair of unsuspecting, defenseless little girls, and you can't even smell it? Imagine that. Let's say you're riding your bike and you see a little girl and you think, oh, I'd love to sniff her hair. Oh, man, no sense of smell. So actually, the costs of COVID are a little more profound than sometimes we understand. What's kind of weird from a political perspective is that Biden got infected with COVID at exactly the moment his approval rating has reached its lowest ebb, not just with normal people, but with Democrats. He's 19% among Hispanic voters. Red alert, anyone? And this also comes at exactly the same moment that his son faces possible felony charges. And also, needless to say, at the moment that his dementia has become so obvious that no one can possibly deny it. I'm in Israel to honor the Holocaust, he just said. Oh, it's so awful. So what does this mean? Well, this incites the blood instincts of others in his party. Gretchen Whitmer, probably sitting in her rec room right now, polishing a resume. I could replace him. But the real story here is the medical story. Joe Biden and a whole lot of other people have gotten pretty sick with COVID after getting multiple shots. What is that about exactly? How did that happen? It's easy to just mock that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That's clearly untrue. But is there a connection between getting multiple COVID vax shots and getting sicker? Is it possible that the vaccine actually can hurt you, especially if you keep getting boosted? Can it weaken your immune system? Well, that looks possible. Multiple studies have looked into this. Just last month, the Journal of Food and Chemical Toxicology published the findings of several mRNA researchers, and we're quoting. In this paper, we present evidence that vaccination induces a profound impairment in type 1 interferon signaling, which has diverse adverse consequences to human health. Well, that seems like a headline. Did you read that in the New York Times? No, you probably didn't. Kind of weird, since hundreds of millions of people got the shot. The researchers continued that in their studies of the COVID vaccine, quote, we identified potential profound disturbances in regulatory control of protein synthesis and cancer surveillance. These disturbances potentially have a causal link to neurodegenerative disease, myocarditis, Bell's palsy, liver disease, impaired adaptive immunity, impaired DNA damage response, etc. So it's possible, in fact, it's looking likely, that the vaccine might suppress the immune system. This fact, the authors concluded, will, quote, have a wide range of consequences, not the least of which include the reactivation of latent viral infections and the reduced ability to effectively combat future infections, end quote. Now, again, we sincerely hope that's not true. But it's not just the conclusion of one scientific journal. The Lancet, maybe the most famous scientific journal in the world, released similar findings in February. The Lancet's piece was entitled, quote, Risk of Infection, Hospitalization, and Death up to 9 months after a second dose of COVID-19 vaccine. A physician called Kenji Yamamoto made this observation about the data from the Lancet. He wrote this in a letter to the Journal of Virology, and we're quoting. The study showed that immune function among vaccinated individuals 8 months after the administration of 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine was lower than that among the unvaccinated individuals. Now your first response, if you're a humane person, to a line like that has got to be deep sympathy. Because people were misled, they were forced. Medical ethics thrown out the window. People were forced to take medicine they didn't want, and some of them may have been hurt by it. And you don't have to take this man's word for it. Pull up the Lancet study yourself. You won't find anything of the text of the article saying what Kenji Yamamoto said, which is weird. Why would the Lancet want to hide a major finding like that? We can't say. But if you look at Table 3 in the piece, here's what you'll find buried in the data. Among people around the age of 80 who have been double vaccinated, that would include people like Joe Biden, the per capita rate of medical incidences, including hospitalizations or death, is nearly twice as high as the rate of serious incidents for the unvaccinated. This is 180 days after vaccination. What is that? And why is no one interested? The piece also includes a chart showing negative vaccine efficacy for all ages after 8 months for all participants in the study. So, again, this is sad news for a lot of Americans, but it's also a profound indictment, maybe the greatest indictment in our lifetimes, of our leaders. Their recklessness, their pig-headedness, their dishonesty. Given this, how is the D.C. government, among many others, still requiring school children, public and private school children, to get a COVID vaccine? That's a question that no one asked at today's White House press briefing. How are members of the U.S. military being dismissed without their pensions because they won't take this same vaccine in light of these study results? Is no one paying attention? How is this allowed? But instead, today at the White House briefing, all the questions are about the proof of life video that Joe Biden's office released today. Here it is.
Hey, folks, guess you heard this morning I tested positive for COVID. But I've been double vaccinated, double boosted. Symptoms are mild, and I really appreciate your inquiries and your concerns. But I'm doing well. I'm getting a lot of work done. I'm going to continue to get it done.
Here's a question. Is there a single public statement Joe Biden has made since Inauguration Day that he did not read off a teleprompter? Is there one? Find it. So the question that came up at today's press briefing was, after seeing that, is who shot that footage? Is that person in danger? Well, once again, the president's glass ceiling shattering publicist, Karine Jean-Pierre, was asked that question. And she said it's totally fine because the video was taken outside. And there's no risk outside that we will arrest you for paddleboarding in California. But then an hour earlier, to make this even messier, because it's inherently messy, because it's Biden related, the White House released this picture. And it shows Joe Biden, brace yourselves, indoors at his desk, no mask. So who shot that picture? Is that person still alive? Does that person have monkeypox? Presumably the White House photographer is vaccinated. That's got to be a requirement of work in there. But as we just saw, that may make the photographer more vulnerable to infection. And in fact, and we hate to say this, it might mean the photographer is now more likely to face serious health complications. So underlying all of this is a really ominous fact, and that is a lot of people have been hurt by this. You hate to say it. Germany's Ministry of Health found that 1 in 5,000 Germans have suffered, quote, serious side effects after a COVID-19 vaccine. Now, 1 in 5,000 may seem like a lot or a little, but extrapolate forward to the United States, a country with our population. That would mean that in the U.S., if that number holds constant across countries, and why wouldn't it, it would mean more than 100,000 Americans may have been seriously injured by the COVID vaccine. Why does no one talk about them? Why does nobody care? And what happens to them now? If Joe Biden accomplishes a single thing as president, it will be getting more people to ask that question today. And it's a fair question. And to end, science is about questions. Science is questioning. So anyone who tells you you're anti-science for asking a question doesn't understand what science is.